So I'm still getting questions during photo critiques, and maybe you have this question too. Why are my pictures blurry? And I'll look at these images, and most of the time it looks like it's not that the image is out of focus, but that there's some kind of motion blur. Something was moving during the exposure. So I'll look at the metadata, and it's usually an aperture of like f4 to 5.6, an ISO of 100, and a shutter speed of 1/50th of a second, photographing pets and children and other people. Well, okay, that's why your pictures are blurry. Your shutter speed was too slow. Increase your ISO to 400 or 800, and that'll give you a fast enough shutter speed to freeze that movement. And then their next question is, but then won't I have noise in my picture? And so then I ask, what would you rather have? A sharp image that has a little bit of noise, or a clean image that is totally blurry because the shutter speed was too slow? And that's usually when the light bulb comes on. Now, I'm not faulting any of these photographers, just with all of the information available on the internet. There are a lot of old sources out there that say don't use anything above ISO 200 or 400 because you're going to have noise. While this may have been true decades ago, it's not really a problem with today's sensors. You can get really clean images up to ISOs into the thousands these days. And there are also a lot of new sources of people telling photographers use the lowest ISO possible. But this does not mean 100 for every single picture. The lowest ISO possible means the lowest ISO to give you the exposure that you want. Now, I'm a documentary photographer. My job is to capture moments that will never again exist anywhere in this universe. And that's how I'd encourage you to think of your own photography, no matter what kind of photography that you do. Unless, of course, maybe it's like posed product photography. But for the most part, you are capturing images, capturing moments that will never exist again. And so it's our job to pick the exposure variables that will let us do that. And ISO isn't really exposure. Exposure is aperture and shutter speed. ISO is an amplifier of those exposure variables. Set the aperture to give you the depth of field that you want, or if that's not important and you're in low light, open it all the way up. Set the shutter speed for the motion that is in front of the camera and whether or not you want to freeze that motion to have a sharp image or blur that motion to create more of a dynamic feeling, and then adjust the ISO as appropriate for that aperture and shutter speed. And if you need kind of like an introduction about how to think through all of this, you can check out the exposure triangle for beginners course. It's free, it walks you through all of that. But what I'm trying to say here is do not sacrifice a sharp image for a clean image. Consider you're a new wedding photographer and you're getting ready to shoot your first wedding. And you want to make sure that you give the bride clean images. So you lock that ISO in at 100 and you shoot the wedding. It's a few hours long. You get home with thousands of pictures to go through. And as you're going through them, you notice that almost every single picture is blurry because you were at a shutter speed of, I don't know, 1/20th, 1/50th of a second because your ISO was at 100. And now you can't give that bride any of those pictures because they're all blurry. Not a single one is sharp. Now, I can guarantee you that no one outside of the photography community cares about noise or high ISO. Even most people inside of the photography community don't really care. It's kind of a made up fear that we have that we can't use high ISOs. However, when you do that, you are handicapping yourself to low shutter speeds. And that bride, she is gonna notice that every single picture is blurry. She's not gonna notice the noise. And you can't reshoot that wedding. Like it's done, it's gone forever. So, what are you gonna do about this? Well, I'd really encourage you to take a look at using auto ISO. Now, this is set up differently in different camera brands and camera models. I'll have some links in the description to walk you through how to set up and use auto ISO in both Fujifilm and Nikon cameras. But here's just an example of how it works. Years ago, I had a reunion with some guys I flew with in Afghanistan. We were sitting around a campfire at night. It was really dark, and I was using an auto ISO program that had an upper limit of 12,800. Now, if you said to anyone 15 years ago that you're going to use 12,800, they would have said, you're crazy. But that was my upper limit for this auto ISO program. And I programmed a minimum shutter speed of 1/125th of a second. The camera is going to use whatever ISO it needs up to the upper limit to give me a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second, which for an event like this, people sitting around a campfire, should be fast enough to freeze most motion. As the campfire gets brighter, the ISO will automatically decrease. And as that campfire starts to burn out and get dim, the ISO is going to automatically increase to keep that shutter speed fast enough. The point being, I can just leave it up to the camera, and the camera is going to give me the lowest ISO possible for the given light. Just like when we said a few minutes ago, to use the lowest ISO possible, that's what auto ISO is going to do. Give you the lowest possible ISO for your exposure variables. Now, are these pictures ruined by an ISO of 12,800? Hell no, I don't see it. Would they have been ruined had I dropped that ISO down to 800, which would have given me a shutter speed of 1/4 of a second, somewhere around there? Yeah, absolutely. They all would have been way too blurry, and I wouldn't have been able to give them to any of my friends. So do not be afraid of high ISOs. Do be afraid of shutter speeds that are going to be too slow and give you a blurry picture. What are your thoughts on this? I'd love to hear what you have to think about it. Please let us know in the comments. Subscribe for more great tips and discussions like this every week. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.